The patient in bed 7 of the Hargrove County General ICU is a man named Thomas Calloway, 58 years old, admitted 3 days ago with what the emergency department documented as acute on chronic liver failure, a diagnosis whose clinical picture has been, in the 72 hours since admission, steadily and specifically worsening in the way that liver failure worsens when the underlying cause has not been fully identified, and the treatment protocol is therefore addressing the presentation rather than the disease. Dr. Nora Yuen has been the attending physician on the hepatology consult service for 4 days, covering for a colleague on family leave, and she has been watching bed 7 with the specific focused unease of a physician whose clinical instincts are telling her that the patient's trajectory does not fit the working diagnosis. She is 36 years old. She is a hepatologist at University Medical Center, 60 miles from Hargrove County General, covering this rural hospital's specialist consult service as part of a regional partnership program that sends subspecialty physicians to hospitals too small to maintain full specialist coverage. She pulls up the chart for bed 7. Thomas Calloway, 58. Hargrove County. Farmer. No significant medical history until 14 months ago. Wife Margaret Calloway, 56. No children listed. Nora reads that line. She reads it the way she reads all clinical details, once for information, once for what the information implies. She is not sure why this particular detail has snagged her attention. She sets it aside. She goes back to the clinical picture. The clinical picture is wrong in a specific way that she needs to understand before it becomes irreversible. What no chart contains, because charts contain what patients tell the intake team and intake teams ask the questions the forms require, is this: Thomas and Margaret Calloway had a daughter. They had her for 5 years, 5 years of a life together that was, by the account of the people in Hargrove County who knew them then, a life that looked from outside like a family and that was, from the inside, more complicated than families usually announce themselves to be. They were young. Thomas was 23 and Margaret was 21 when the girl was born, and they were young in the specific way of people who have not yet finished becoming themselves and who find, when a child arrives, that the unfinished parts become urgent. They gave her up at 5. Not through the courts, through the specific private arrangement that people in small rural counties sometimes make when circumstances have exceeded their capacity. A couple in the next county, the Yuens, who had been trying to have children for 8 years, had come forward, and Thomas and Margaret Calloway had, in the specific exhausted grief of people who have decided something that they cannot fully live with but cannot see their way around, agreed. The girl's name had been Emma Calloway. The Yuens renamed her Nora. She grew up 60 miles away in a town she considered home, raised by parents she considered her parents, knowing she was adopted. She had become a doctor because of a specific day when she was 9 years old and her adoptive father had a cardiac event in the kitchen, and she had watched the paramedics work and understood, with the specific clarity of a 9-year-old who has just seen something true, that this was what mattered. She had specialized in hepatology because liver disease in rural populations was undertreated and underdiagnosed, and because there was something about diseases of accumulation, conditions that develop slowly over years from exposures that are neither dramatic nor visible until they become critical, that matched a particular quality of her attention. She did not know, sitting at the nurse's station at Hargrove County General on the 4th day of her coverage rotation, that the man in bed 7 was Thomas Calloway. The social history in Thomas Calloway's chart contains, on the 3rd careful reading, a detail that the admitting team noted and did not flag because it was not, in the context of the admission diagnosis, immediately clinically relevant. Patient reports significant occupational exposure to organophosphate pesticides across approximately 35 years of agricultural work. Wife also with occupational exposure, similar duration. Nora reads this and something shifts in her clinical thinking. Not a dramatic shift, the specific small pivot of a hypothesis adjusting to accommodate a new variable. She pulls the wife's chart. Margaret Calloway's chart shows a pattern that Nora, reading it with the eyes of a hepatologist who has spent 8 years reading rural population disease patterns, recognizes as the specific, slow accumulation of hepatotoxic damage that chronic organophosphate exposure produces, elevated enzymes, gradual over years, attributed in each annual note to nonspecific causes, never aggregated into a picture because no single visit produced a picture alarming enough to trigger the aggregation. She is not yet the patient. Her husband is the patient. But she will be, Nora thinks, reading the trajectory in the numbers, unless someone intervenes with the understanding of what they are actually looking at. Nora sits at the nurse's station for a moment with both charts open on the screen. She thinks about the working diagnosis for bed 7. Acute on chronic liver failure, etiology unclear. She thinks about the organophosphate exposure history. She thinks about the specific biochemical mechanism of organophosphate hepatotoxicity, which she knows in the specific way of someone who has published a paper on it. A paper that began as a question about why rural agricultural communities showed elevated rates of cryptogenic liver failure, and arrived at organophosphate exposure as a significant contributing factor that was being systematically missed because the exposure history was not being elicited or aggregated. She knows this disease. She has spent 3 years understanding it. She is sitting across from the clearest case of it she has ever seen in a living patient. The social worker is a woman named Cheryl Briggs, 54, who has been at Hargrove County General for 21 years and who knows, in the way of someone who has spent 21 years in a small county, a very great deal about the specific histories of the families who come through its doors. Thomas Calloway, Nora says. Bed 7. I have a clinical question about his family history that might require some context. Cheryl Briggs is quiet for a moment. In Nora's experience, the quality of a social worker's silence tells you more than most people's speech. She goes to Cheryl's office. It is small and warm and has the specific quality of a space where difficult things are regularly said. Cheryl looks at her for a long moment before she speaks. The Callaways had a daughter, she says. She was placed informally with a family in Millbrook County when she was 5 years old. This would have been 1993. I know about it because I was doing my field placement here at the time, and it was one of the first cases I was involved in. The family who took the child, the adoptive family, their name was Yuen. The specific quality of the silence that follows this sentence is unlike any silence Nora Yuen has experienced in 36 years of being in rooms where things are said. Millbrook County, Nora says. Her voice is the voice she uses when she is holding something very heavy and needs to keep her hands steady. Yes, Cheryl says. The Yuens, Nora says. Yes, Cheryl says. He doesn't know I'm his doctor, Nora says finally. No. The chart shows no family. He told the intake team he had no children. Because he gave me away, Nora says. And he believes that's still true. Are you all right? Cheryl says. I need to understand what this means for his care, Nora says. The rest of it, I'll figure out the rest of it. But right now I need to think clearly, and to think clearly I need to separate what I feel from what he needs. What does he need? He needs me to be his doctor. Everything else is secondary to that. At least for now. She stands up. She goes back to the ICU. Nora Yuen goes back to bed 7 with a specific collected focus of someone who has, in the past 40 minutes, received information that reorganizes the landscape of her life, and who has decided, with the specific professional discipline that medicine requires, that the reorganization will have to wait until the patient in front of her is stable enough for her to afford the attention. She introduces herself to Thomas Calloway properly. Thomas Calloway is a compact man whose illness has diminished him in the specific way that liver failure diminishes people, the jaundice visible in his sclera, the fluid retention that changes the shape of a person, the fatigue that is deeper than tiredness. He looks at her when she introduces herself with the eyes of someone who is unwell enough to have given up the social management of interactions and is simply present. He does not recognize her. Why would he? She was 5 years old when he last saw her, and she is 36 now. She does not tell him. Not yet. Not here, not like this, not in the ICU with the monitors and the jaundice and the specific vulnerability of someone who is being taken apart by a disease. She examines him. She asks him about his work, the farm, the specific pesticides when he started, whether he wore protective equipment. She builds the diagnosis. Organophosphate hepatotoxicity, chronic exposure, acute decompensation triggered by a secondary hepatic insult. A viral infection that a healthy liver would have managed, and that his compromised liver cannot. The working diagnosis was wrong not because the team missed the liver failure but because they missed the cause, and the cause is what determines the treatment. She adjusts the protocol. She orders the confirming tests. She initiates the treatment that addresses the actual disease rather than its presentation. She does all of this with the full weight of her training and her attention and her specific expertise in exactly this category of disease. She does it for a patient she has known for 4 days and for 31 years at the same time. She meets Margaret Calloway in the family waiting room on the afternoon of the 5th day, when Thomas Calloway is stable enough that Nora can give a genuine update. Margaret Calloway is 56 and has the specific quality of someone who has spent 5 days in a hospital family waiting room, the compressed wakefulness, the clothing that was appropriate for the first day and has continued past its appropriate duration. She stands when Nora enters the way people stand when the doctor comes. Mrs. Calloway. I'm Dr. Yuen. I've been your husband's hepatology attending. Margaret Calloway looks at her. She is a woman with dark hair going gray and the specific physical economy of someone who has worked outdoors for most of her adult life. And she looks at Nora with eyes that are, in their color and in their shape and in the specific quality of attention they carry, a version of something Nora has seen in her own reflection. The recognition is a physical thing. Nora has not expected it to be physical. She does not allow herself to process it. She gives the update, the diagnosis, the adjusted treatment, the improved trajectory, the cautious optimism. She explains what organophosphate hepatotoxicity means, and what caused it, and what the treatment addresses. Then Margaret says, his liver. Is this something that could affect family members? People who were in the same environment, same exposures? Yes, Nora says. People with similar exposure histories should be evaluated. I actually wanted to speak with you about your own chart. I've reviewed your outpatient records and I have some concerns about your liver function that I'd like to discuss. Margaret looks at her for a long moment. Long enough that Nora has the specific feeling of being seen more completely than she has prepared to be seen. What's your first name, Dr. Yuen? If you don't mind my asking. Nora, she says. Margaret Calloway looks at her with eyes that are the specific color and shape of Nora's own eyes in a version that 30 additional years of living have made into something different and something recognizable at the same time. Nora, she says quietly, and then says nothing else. On the morning of the 6th day, Nora arrives at Hargrove County General to find a note at the nurse's station, handwritten on the notepaper that the family waiting room provides. Her name, Dr. Yuen, written on the outside. She takes it to the small dictation room at the end of the corridor, the one with a door that closes, and she reads it. The note is from Margaret Calloway. 2 pages, front and back, in the specific handwriting of someone who has written carefully and then written over the careful version with the honest version, the crossing out and the revision visible in the paper. Dear Nora, I have known since the 3rd day. Not who you were as a person, but that you were who you were. You look the way I have imagined you might look, and I have imagined it many times across 31 years. I want to tell you that we looked for you. When you were 11, we hired someone to try to find where you had gone, and they found the town and the county, and then they found a wall they couldn't get past, and Thomas decided that the wall meant something, that the wall meant you were okay and that we should leave you to be okay rather than arrive in your life and make it harder. Giving you away was the worst thing we ever did. And we did it because we were 21 and 23 and very afraid and very wrong about what was possible. You are caring for your father with a skill and a specificity that I have watched for 6 days, and that I recognize as something he and I did not give you and that you built entirely yourself. I don't know how to hold what it means that the person saving his life is the person whose life we let go. I am not asking you for anything. I am telling you that I know who you are, and that if you decide you want nothing to do with us, I will understand that completely, and that if you ever want something different from that, I will be here. Margaret. Nora sits in the dictation room for 22 minutes. She has been the daughter of James and Linda Yuen for 31 years. She has been Emma Calloway for 5 years before that, though she has no memory of being Emma that is clearer than the general warm blur of early childhood. A farm, a smell of grass, a hand that was large and a voice that was low. She folds the letter. She puts it in her coat pocket. She goes back to the ICU. She checks Thomas Calloway's morning laps. They are better. The trajectory is holding. She stands at the foot of bed 7 and looks at the man who is her biological father. She has his hands. She noticed this on the second day and has been carrying it since. The same specific structure of the knuckles, the same way the thumb sits. She makes a note in the chart. She adjusts one medication. She does the work. Thomas Calloway is well enough on the 8th day to be sitting up in bed with a specific alertness that illness has not permitted until now, the returning quality of someone whose liver is slowly beginning to do what livers are supposed to do. Nora comes for rounds. She is alone. She sits. You're improving, she says. The numbers are moving in the right direction. I feel like it, he says. His voice is stronger. More like myself. That's the liver coming back online, she says. Slowly. It'll take time, but the direction matters more than the pace right now. He nods. He looks at her with the fresh attention of someone whose returning health has restored his capacity to actually see what is in the room. My wife told me something last night, he says. Nora's still. She told me she wrote you a letter. She did, Nora says. He is quiet for a long moment. I don't know what to say to you, he says. It is the most honest sentence she has heard from him in 8 days. You don't have to say anything, she says. I'm your doctor right now. That's the thing that matters most right now. But after that, he says, when I'm not your patient anymore. After that, she says, we'll have more time to figure out what there is to say. She has his hands, the same specific structure of the knuckles. He looks at her. She looks at him. I'm sorry, he says. She sits with this for a moment, not the clinical moment, the other kind. I know, she says. I believe you. That's not enough, he says. No, she says. It's not. But it's a place to start. She stands. She makes her chart note. She moves to the next patient. She comes back tomorrow. And the day after. She comes back every day because that is the work, and because the work is the most honest thing she knows how to do. And because somewhere in the 31 years between 5 and 36 she became the person who shows up, and she is not going to stop being that person in the room where it matters most. She drives back to the city that evening, the 60 miles she drives every 4th week, the route she has taken for 2 years without knowing what it led toward. And she thinks about what her adoptive father said to her, once when she was 12 and had said that she wished she knew where she had come from. He had said, you come from every decision you've ever made and every person who's ever loved you. The rest of it is just geography. She had thought at 12 that this was a comfortable deflection. She had thought at 20 that it was wise. She thinks now, driving 60 miles back toward the city, that it is all of those things at once, and that being all of those things at once is what true things are like. She is Nora Yuen. She is also, in some biological and geographical and now clinical sense, Emma Calloway. She is the daughter of James and Linda Yuen, who raised her and loved her and gave her the specific qualities that allowed her to become the physician who could walk into a hospital 60 miles from where she grew up and save the life of a man she did not know was her father. She is also the daughter of Thomas and Margaret Calloway, from whom she has, among other things, the structure of her hands and some portion of her attention for the diseases of accumulation, conditions that develop slowly, over years, from exposures that are neither dramatic nor visible until they become critical. She has been studying a category of disease that her biological father had, without knowing it, for 35 years, and she found him because she understood it better than anyone else in 60 miles. She pulls into the hospital parking structure in the city. She turns off the engine. She sits for a moment in the dark, in the specific quiet of a car after a long drive, and she thinks about a 5-year-old girl who was given away and a 36-year-old doctor who drove 60 miles every fourth week for 2 years and ended up in the room where she was needed most. 14 months after Nora Yuen's first shift at Hargrove County General, Thomas Calloway is in her outpatient clinic for a follow-up appointment that is, by the specific metrics of hepatology follow-up, unremarkable. The numbers are where they should be, the trajectory is stable, the lifestyle modifications maintained with the specific disciplined attention of someone who has been given a second chance at a physical level and takes it seriously at every level simultaneously. Margaret Calloway, who underwent her own hepatology evaluation 6 weeks after Thomas's discharge, and whose liver function has been on a monitored and managed treatment protocol for 11 months, is with him. Nora sits across from both of them in the clinic room. They have been doing this for 14 months, sitting across from each other in clinic rooms, building the clinical relationship that the situation requires and, alongside it and sometimes overlapping with it and sometimes separate from it and always complicated by it, the other relationship, the one that has no medical vocabulary, that is being built in the specific slow way of things that were interrupted for 31 years. At the door, Thomas Calloway turns back. Your colleague mentioned that this regional program, the one that sends you to Hargrove, is being reviewed for funding, that they might discontinue it. It's under review, Nora says. Budget pressures. Rural health coverage has been underfunded for a long time. He looks at her. 14 months of clinic appointments and a specific kind of knowing each other have given his gaze a quality it did not have when he was the patient in bed 7. I hope they keep it, he says. So do I, she says. She watches them go down the hallway, the specific gait of a man who is recovering and the woman beside him who has always been there and who is recovering in her own way, and between them the specific quality of a couple who have lived through something and who are still, after 35 years of marriage and many difficult things, walking in the same direction. James Yuen and Linda Yuen, her adoptive parents, both told the full story on a Sunday afternoon 9 months ago that Nora will not soon forget, and that ended with her mother and Margaret Calloway exchanging phone numbers. Know about the Calloways. Everyone is in the specific uncomfortable and necessary process of working out what a family looks like when it is built from pieces that were separated for 3 decades and are being put back together by people who are no longer the people they were when the separation happened.